Welcome back to the Figly podcast. On this episode for today, we have Alaric Qin, who is a Penn alumni currently working in tech, but has a passion for music and community building. Today, we sat down with him to discuss the importance of maintaining a zest for life and exploring the nuances of being first-generation low income and taking care of loved ones while bettering your own life. Hello and welcome back to the Figly podcast. Today we have this week's guest, Alaric Qin, a Penn alum who is currently in New York and working in tech but passionate about music and community building. I'm Emily, your host. How are you doing today, Alaric?
Hi, Emily. I'm doing so great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming to Penn and doing this for us. So I guess this episode, I kind of want to focus more on about kind of your life and like what you kind of did at Penn like during your undergrad and like the impact that you have right now in the Penn community, since I know you're still very involved, and as well as just like your I guess passions in life and like what you kind of want to do besides like I guess tech. So I guess can you first start with a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Alaric. I'm from Southern California. And maybe it makes sense to start with kind of like my background and my family history and things like that. Do you think that makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, I guess it starts with my parents, really, right? They are from China. They're from northern China, and they immigrated to the U.S. in the late 80s. And they moved all the way to Los Angeles. They're both concert violinists. Yeah.
Wait, that's really cool.
So they've always been very passionate about music, and they actually met in orchestra together when they were young. Okay. But when they left China and moved to the U.S., they had to give that up, and they became workers at a Chinese restaurant, washing dishes for a bunch of years, and that's when they had me. And I have a sister as well who's a couple years older than me, and so they raised us together in the L.A. area. And so my earliest memories are sort of just in that area, sort of having a pretty happy childhood. We didn't have a lot, because I think that restaurant life is pretty hard.
Yeah.
But they always, took good care of us. And eventually they worked and saved up enough for us to go to college. And, that's sort of how I ended up at Penn.
I was just wondering, I guess like, growing up, I'm assuming like you probably like there was like a point in time when you found out your parents were violinists. How did you feel, I guess, like knowing like the life that you guys are living or like you guys lived throughout your childhood versus like the life that like your parents had before you guys?
Yeah, so I got to experience a bit of both. I think my sister sort of had it a lot harder than I did. Being older, she sort of saw the early sort of years of trying to make it as an immigrant in the United States and how challenging that was at a time when there were much fewer Asian folks in that part of LA at the time. And, as sort of more folks immigrated in like the early 90s and things like that, my understanding is that, my parents were able to sort of thrive in that community a bit more, and so they went from working in the restaurant to gradually establishing like a music tutoring business where they would teach other folks in the community like piano and violin. And so I actually grew up at home listening to the sounds of piano and violin constantly, like after school. And so like different parents would take their kids in and out of our house at the time, and it would just be a bunch of folks like learning the violin and learning the piano, like one sort of Suzuki book at a time, and so that's sort of like the world that I grew up in. So I always grew up around music, and I grew up loving music, and I grew up playing instruments and just sort of being in that type of community.
Yeah, wait, that's actually really like nice, because I feel like growing up, or a lot of like my Asian friends like growing up, they're always like, oh, like we have to like play piano or like do violin just because, and I feel like there's always that like lack of like I guess inspiration or motivation to actually do I guess music or like play music because you like just generally just love it. And I feel like it's really nice hearing like from like someone that is Asian or like from like an Asian background that like has that like love for music, and like their family does as well. So I guess on to kind of your diversity and your community building work. So can you kind of talk about like the types of inclusivity and diversity work that you've done during your time at Penn and now?
Yeah, I guess like probably the best place to start with this is to explain some of the motivation behind why maybe I got involved, and I think it has to do with the way I was brought up, right? So, I grew up in this sort of multicultural, multi-ethnic community that was primarily sort of Taiwanese, American, Chinese American, and also Mexican as well in that part of LA I grew up in. So it was very diverse, and sort of, we grew up sort of with multiculturalism as the norm, right? And when I got to Penn, there was this sort of crazy culture shock that I experienced coming here. I went from being in a place that was multicultural and sort of where folks were in. Let me start over. We went from a place where there were folks from everywhere speaking different languages all the time to being at a place where all of a sudden I felt very distinctly like a minority. And it was one of the first times in my life where I felt I didn't have the words to describe it at the time, but I felt othered in a lot of ways. I got here and sort of people would make pretty outlandish comments to me like, hey, wow, like your English is so great. Where did you learn it?
Oh, really?
Yes.
And you graduated in 2015?
I graduated in 2015, so I got here in 2011, right? And so, for better or for worse, I think folks just hadn't really experienced the type of multiculturalism that I grew up in. And so I came from a place that was very diverse, and I got here and I thought to myself, whoa, what is going on? But at the same time, I recognized that that's not the lived experience of a lot of folks. Like a lot of folks came here as the singular or one of the few sort of people of color in their town, get to Penn and they experience sort of like this diverse place as well. And so it's just interesting to me how like those two sort of lived experiences can both coincide and coexist here. But that got me really interested in sort of thinking about this type of thing and kind of understanding that when I grew up in my community, like essentially we were part of the majority of folks of diverse backgrounds. And then when I got to Penn, it was more like, hey, there's like this sort of difference in the way that like folks are, I guess backgrounded maybe is the word I'm thinking of. And so that's how I got sort of first involved in learning about Patch and some of these other Asian and other safe spaces for people of color. And what struck me at the time when I was a student was how inclusive they were and how welcoming they were unconditionally, right? Because I think we all know that Penn can be a very stressful place. And Penn can be a place where I think there are a lot of in-groups and there's a lot of out-groups. And for people who are new here or from far away, I think a lot of people can land somewhere, but I think without some intention, sometimes it can be hard, right? And so Patch and sort of I think it was like APSC and a lot of these cultural groups, right? Like they played such a big part in like making me feel welcome. And to this day, a lot of my lifelong friends actually met through like PTS and CSA. And
that's really sweet.
Yeah. Like some of my best friends today that I live near and play and hang out with in New York, like I met like at a CSA dumpling night, or you know what I mean? So like
they still do those.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so I've really been appreciative of like the impact that those spaces had for me, and that feeling of belonging in community is something that's always been very important to me. And so being able to sort of experience that firsthand here as a student made me want to continue that in some way when I left. And so I've always had that urge. And for me, when I was a few years out of work, like the question became, how do I get back into that? How do I continue to find that sense of belonging? Because once you leave college, once you leave this sort of world where everybody's in such close proximity to you and everybody's sort of in the same mindset of openness and wanting to get to know one another, you go into the real world, you go into work, and I think a lot of people are like more focused on work than life sometimes. I think we start to forget, like, what are the things that brought us joy, right? What in the arts and humanities and sort of like, what about life that's beautiful, like, can we take with us into the working world and beyond to retain that, like, sort of sense of self and, like, meaning and purpose? And for me, asking that question led me to trying to find belonging and trying to create it where it could exist, So.
Well, yeah, that's really nice, because I feel like, I guess, like, after graduation, I feel like a lot of my friends, like, during their senior year, they're kind of just, like, worried about, I guess, post-graduation and, like, what it, like, means to be a quote-unquote adult. And I feel like they're so focused on that where they kind of, like, lose their, I guess, I don't know, like their inner child or whatever. But just going back to your point about kind of your experience with the Asian community and just, like, feeling a sense of belonging here at Penn, I sometimes feel like, or just like what you kind of said, it made me realize how developed the communities are now at Penn, like especially like me coming here in 2021. Like I kind of like to a certain extent feel like I took it for granted because it kind of feels like they were so established already, and like there's so many like Asian people here. Like I feel like it's very, very different from how you kind of experienced your experience at Penn and with like the Asian community. So I like really appreciate that like you kind of like took initiative to sort of continue and like kind of create more community building within the community.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, I think like what is interesting is and maybe this is a cool project for another time, but it is interesting to think about the oral history of like these organizations at Penn. Like they've had a long, very fruitful, very important and meaningful life for like so many generations of students here.
Yeah.
And you know, even when I was here, there was a lot of work being done in the years prior to like kind of set these orgs up and to create that sense of community. And over time in like New York and other places, I've had the chance to like meet people who, you know, like are a lot older than me, and they're actually the ones who like set up these things in the first place.
Wow.
Like the one person I'm thinking of, this guy named Franklin Shen. I don't know if you've ever met him before.
I'm not.
But he actually was one of the first students at Penn to even fight for Patch and for the cultural centers to exist in the first place. And now we hang out in New York because we're friends, and we met working on like different Asian advocacy and community building efforts, you know, during COVID. But it's just kind of awesome to hear about how he describes that work that was being done back then to like even fight for a voice here and to even fight for a physical space, like these things that we take for granted here, like being able to do this podcast in Patch, you know, like there was no space even to do that before. And so it's just cool to just sort of see the growth and evolution of all the orgs over time.
No, I feel like it's very cool that I guess you guys kind of like were able to bond over this and now are like very, very good friends. And I feel like I think even my freshman year, they were, I think, trying to renovate Patch or something, but I don't know what really happened to it. But I think it's very like I don't know. It's like whenever I do come to Arch and whenever I do come to Patch, I do feel like a sense of like belonging, and like even if like no one's here, it kind of feels like I'm just like at home, which I really like, and I like am very, very grateful for like how like the past generations have sort of like built this for us. It's kind of like what's the phrase? It's like, oh, like you guys ran so that we could walk or something. But yeah.
No, I totally feel that. I think it's like it's a Patch living room, right? It actually feels like your living room, right? Like what a unique, magical, like cultural space to have. You know, it's not easy, I think, to create that type of space. And that was my first memory of ever walking in here, knowing 0 people at Patch and having every single person there be like, hello, what's your name? Like, welcome to Patch. And I was like, wow, everyone's so nice. You know, I never forgot that feeling.
No, it's really nice. There was actually, I think last week I was like trying to do work here, and like literally everyone like around me was just talking, and then like I was like sort of eavesdropping, but I was like, oh, I like need to join to this like conversation, and I just stopped working. And I feel like Patch is definitely like not a place to work, but like a lot of like, I guess like just like bonding and like meeting new people, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I was actually curious, what kind of work are you doing right now with Patch?
Patch? Oh, yeah. So we've done a number of things over the last few years. I think, you know, I really started getting more involved with Patch a few years back when we sort of were thinking about ideas to kind of bring all the communities across Penn together. Because, you know, there's like a lot of different student groups and communities. You know, there's all the cultural orgs, there's like also service orgs, and there's also like, you know, leadership orgs as well. And we're like, well, everyone's sort of like doing their own thing, but what if we did something like together? And so sort of we were like, let's try to do like a Lunar New Year event that like brings everyone together. We'll have food, we'll have celebration, we'll talk to each other, we'll get a chance to all be in the same space and kind of see the landscape of a community. And so that was like really enriching in a number of ways, because first of all, like it was a great event. We had a lot of folks come, both like in person and virtually at the time. We had some performances, guest speakers, we had a lot of food and stuff. So the event itself was great, but I think the real meaningful part of that for me was like the connections that we were able to make by planning the thing in the first place. So we got a chance to meet so many folks like from across like all these different groups, and they're not just like partners now in like planning stuff, we're also friends. Like I'll give 2 examples. Will, Sharina, and then also like Bill and Ine, who are students here, right? And like all of us still hang out because we met doing this Lunar New Year stuff together.
Yeah.
Right, and because of that, like, we also sort of got closer to Patch, closer with the admins and leaders here, and like that really was what kind of precipitated like years of like working together on stuff. So like that was the first thing, and since then, you know, there's been a number of different like brown bag lunches, but and also like you know, guest speakers, like they'll sometimes ask me to come in and talk to kids and students and adults and alumni or whatever, whoever, you know, but then. Yeah, I mean, it's been like a lot of fun to do all those different things. My favorite thing these days is, you know, Patch still feels like a living room to me, even though I'm many years out now from college. And so I'll come from New York and I'll sit and hold space here with everybody and just sort of be in the Patch living room and co-work and coexist and just hang out, you know. And it's kind of fun because I think like the learning goes both ways, you know. They're always like, well, hey, Alaric, talk about your experience doing this and that. But I have learned, I think, way more from everyone here than anyone has learned from me. Like, I just have my one lived experience, right? And it's just like one data point. But I sit here and I like to listen to people share their thoughts, their concerns, their worries, and their perspectives. And it's a good reminder that knowledge and understanding can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, and that's really, really inspiring to me. And it's also a good reminder of that zest for life that I always like really am looking for, right? I come here and I just see just how zesty everybody is in their own way. You know, and it's really inspiring because I think, you know, we had talked about this before. But as time goes on, you know, I think we start out very idealistic, like these are the things I love, these are the things I care about, right? And then as you get older, like a lot of the realities of living as an adult set in, like you got bills to pay, you know, you have your career to think about, you have all these things. And one sort of lament I have about all of that is I think people start to like forget like the things that they sort of declared, like this is my purpose, this is like my mission, this is what I care about, this is what I want to do. Like that becomes a yes, I'll do it when ... like I get somewhere, or like let me give it some more time, but then they just give it time and more time and more time and it gets forgotten. So coming back here is like such a great reminder to me, like don't forget that. You know, come back and seeing everybody being so zesty and passionate like reminds me, hey, I've got passions too, I have things I care about and I need to balance those in my life because that's what makes life worth living for me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's definitely like very inspirational because I feel like me also, I sometimes like do get like lost in the sauce sort of and like with like all the work and like obligations that I have where I kind of just like forget about all my passions. Like, and sometimes like I do like on my to-do list I'll be like, oh, like play piano for like 5 minutes, but like always every time I go put it on my to-do list, like I never do it because I'm just like, oh, like I have too much work or something like that. But yeah, I really like your kind of like the idea of like zest for life because I feel like a lot of people sort of forget about that. And like even like at Penn, like where there's like a really big like work hard, play hard culture, it's kind of like this really just like something that like people forget about. So I feel like especially I guess being first generation low income, that also definitely has an impact on like your balancing between like your obligations and like kind of wanting to do more career oriented things versus kind of like just like doing what you love. So I was wondering if you can touch upon that and kind of like, do you feel like being Figly has kind of like impacted your, I guess, balancing these two things?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think it's definitely true for many people, but especially for me, sort of being Figly is, like it or not, like a huge part of my identity, all right? And it's the way that I was raised and sort of like the life that I grew up with. And my parents sort of worked so hard and gave everything up, gave their own dreams up, essentially, to create a world in which I could even exist. Like, they literally walked so I could run, right? You know, they gave up their passion to create an environment where they survived so that I could have the freedom to talk about my passion, right? And I will never forget that. And I have an obligation now to take care of them, right? The same way that they took care of me, because we don't have, you know, this, like, secret trust fund of money sitting around. We're like, oh, well, now we can just kind of do whatever. Like, we don't have that, right? And so, like, when I think about sort of their financial, emotional, physical, and health security, like, you know, I think, what can I do to make that possible for them? And so a big part of my life has been sort of balancing, what does Alaric want for his life? And what does Alaric want for his family and his parents? And how do I make sure that I can, at least for the remainder of their lives, however long they're with me, take good care of them? You know? And I think it's a challenging problem for me. I was born much later, than my sister. We're 10 years apart. And so, I think there are a lot of pros and cons to that. My parents, were very loving and spent a lot of time taking care of me, but they're also a lot older relative to my age. Yeah. And so I've had to deal with a lot of health challenges that they've faced much earlier than most of my friends and peers, because on average I think my parents are like 10 years older than they are, or their parents are. Yeah. And that has proven to be a big challenge in my life, is navigating my mom's health and balancing my own life. And just to sort of summarize it a bit, during COVID, my mom got really sick. She ended up having a brain tumor and became fully paralyzed. Basically from the neck down. And so I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I had sort of this life that was already sort of put on pause because of COVID. But then I further, reclused and went back home to take care of my mom. And so my dad and I were my mom's full-time caregivers every day for about 2 years. We'd bathe her, feed her, clothe her, and make sure that her needs were met. But I didn't talk to anybody in my life for a full 2 years during that time. I was just totally sucked into sort of day-to-day care for my mom, because at the time they'd also said that she only had a few weeks, months to live at most, and so I was just in crisis mode the whole time. But when I looked up, I realized 2 years had passed. I had sort of not taken care of any of my own needs at all, and my life looked completely different than it did 2 years before. And that sort of, there was this turning point, when I was like, I need to change this, because this is not working for me. I'm not happy, and I'm not doing well, and I need to be happy and doing well in order to, help other people, especially my family. I guess all this to say that, that's been a healing process over the years, to try to figure out how to balance their needs. And I'm much better now at sort of having a better mindset on things and saying, you know what, there are things in life that I can control and things in life that I can't control. But I can help my parents as much as I can, but I still need to move forward with my own life and continue to find that zest and passion. And so that's been sort of my experience as a Figly, is sort of like, hey, I've got my own life, but I also know I have obligations to other people in my life that I love very much. And, people will often ask me, well, does that impact the way that you sort of think about your life, take risks, and follow your passions and all that? I'm like, of course it does. Because, first of all, if I didn't have to, worry about my parents' health all the time, who knows, I might have quit my job already and gone to just go do my year of music, and all of that. But I always have their needs on my mind. And so, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to make sure that no matter what I do, should worst come to worst and something happen and they need help, I want to still be able to help them. So yes, it does impact my life in that way. But these are the types of questions I always think about, when I'm trying to balance all of this stuff.
Definitely. I feel like, thank you for sharing that story. I feel like a lot of people would be able to like sort of resonate with that and kind of like, I guess, sort of like understand where you're coming from, kind of like, oh, like how do I balance between kind of taking care of my family who has like done so much for me and sacrificed for me versus taking care of myself. And I feel like you made a really good point about kind of like, oh, like I can't take care of other people unless I take care of myself first. And I think that's very important, and a lot of people forget about that. And I think there's like this one time that reminds me, my mom and I were like talking, and I forgot somehow it was either me or my brother, and I think, actually no, it was my brother. But basically he's also 8 years older than me, so I'm like kind of like on the same boat as you, where it's like my parents are more older than like my friends' parents, and I feel like I remember this one time my brother told my mom, he was like, oh, like I'm gonna do all this, I'm gonna like take care of you, like I'm gonna buy a house for you, like buy a car for you, blah blah blah. And then my mom was like, oh, but like you have to make sure, like, take care of yourself first. It's like the reason why I came to, like, immigrated to America, or my parents immigrated to America, was so that we could have a better life, right? Even if it's like a smidge better. But I think it's like just the fact that like my mom had to remind my brother also, like, oh, like I sacrificed this stuff for you so that you could have a better life, so like make sure to take care of yourself, or else it's like, quote unquote, like, oh, like it all kind of, like, she was like jokingly being like, oh, like it all goes to waste, like if I like just immigrated here and now you're just taking care of me, like you better like do something with your life as well. Which I thought was like funny, because I feel like not funny, but like I think just the way that my mom uses humor sometimes to sort of like cope with these things. I'm just like, okay. But I think like that's also maybe a little bit funnier in the long run. But yeah, I definitely like, like I think your story definitely like is very like impactful, and like the realizations and like the journey that you've had like throughout these years. I think a lot of people can learn from it. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks so much for listening. I guess I'll just say that, you know, my one takeaway so far from all of this is that, like, you know, no matter how bad things get with your family and all of that, it's still they're still your family, and you can still take care of them. But I would just never forget to take care of yourself too, because I think without that, it's hard to do anything else. You know.
Yeah.
And one silver lining of all this, you know, for me is just that now I look at all the random things that happen that are like slightly inconvenient in life. You know, like, oh, I have a bad day at work or whatever. Right? And like none of this matters because I have my health, I have my happiness. You know, I have the big important things, and so the rest is just is it just is what it is, you know.
Yeah, there's just like little bumps on the road.
Yeah, I feel way more unbothered about things.
Honestly, that's nice.
Yeah, and so I'm grateful for that at least.
Yeah. I'm just actually just curious. I guess like speaking to other Figley students here, I've realized that just like being at Penn has kind of give them like a peace of mind and kind of like physically and like mentally separated from like, you know, their family, and sort of like, I guess like if there are family issues and like kind of just like things that they would have to deal with if they were at home, I guess. I don't know if you experienced this when you were at Penn, but I guess, do you have any advice for people kind of like balancing between like kind of like furthering like yourself as an individual like at Penn, while kind of like not having that sense of guilt with doing it as you're like kind of like away from home and like not quote unquote taking care of like your home and your family?
Yeah. This one is interesting to me because I dealt a lot with feelings of guilt when I was here. Obviously, like, I think even without the guilt, just being at Penn is an experience in itself. There's like plenty of stressors already on campus, you know. You go from a world in which, I think this is my experience in high school, every teacher just tells you, here's what you need to do, right? You spend your whole life being told, like, here's what you have to do in order to succeed and to go to college. Then you get to college, and everyone's like, you're on your own, actually. You can make any decision you want, and not only are we not going to advise you, we actually don't really care on some level institutionally what you choose to do. And so going to an environment where all of a sudden you're completely on your own, and you're quite physically, literally on your own, away from your parents and your family as well, like, that was very impactful for me, because, you know, I think it's just earth-shattering maybe, to all of a sudden be cast out into the wilderness and have to, like, figure out the decisions for your own. But then on top of that, you're feeling the guilt from, like, I'm not at home helping my parents, like, translate at the cash counter every time they go to the store, or I'm not, like, on the phone, like, with, you know, T-Mobile or whatever, like, trying to figure out their, like, cell phone bill. And, like, for most of my childhood and growing up, like, those were the things my parents would ask me for help with because they immigrated here and, you know, they didn't spend their youth here like we did. And we just know things and we're better at certain things that we can help with that they have trouble doing on their own. And so I think it was an adjustment for all of us. You know, I would feel so guilty because I would leave for the semester, go home for fall break, and then, you know, my parents would be like, hey, you know, this thing broke. Could you help fix it? And I'd be like, yeah, it looks like it's been broken for a while. And they're like, oh, yeah, it broke like 3 months ago. We were just waiting for you to come back. And we didn't even tell you. And I just, like, felt so bad. I was like, oh, my God, you've been living without, like your dryer for, like, 3 months? Like, how are you doing this, you know? But I struggle with that a lot. And actually, my mom did also get sick, like, when I was in college, too. So it was even tougher. She's always had sort of poor health over the years. And so every time I would leave, you know, not to get dark or anything, but I would wonder, like, is this the last time I will see my mom? Because she really was not doing well when I was in college, too. And so that was an extra layer of guilt on here. But, you know, sort of like you said with your mom, like, I knew that deep down inside, like, and at the time when she was feeling better, on better days, she would tell me this, too. Like, we didn't come all the way from China to the U.S. So for you to not go do something with your life for you. And so I would just remember those words in the bad times, remind myself, hey, look, like, I'm actually not just doing this for me, I'm doing this for my family, too, because, you know, we're an immigrant family. We don't have much here in the U.S. This is for better for worse, like one of the chances I have to figure out how to break that cycle and to get into a place where I can do better for me and do better for my family, my parents, and maybe, you know, future members of my family, right? And so, like, that was sort of the thinking that I had. But it was hard to cope with, you know. I know, like, people will sometimes like, well, like, what did you do to, like, cope with it? And I just don't think there's, like, a magic wand or anything like that. It was just hard, and I worked through it a lot, and I was really sad and depressed some days, and I was okay other days, but it was always on my mind. And to this day, too, it doesn't stop after Penn. Like, I moved to SF, and I moved to New York, you know, after graduating from college, and both of those places are pretty far away from LA, where my parents still are, so I always think about that now, too. You know, how do I take care of their needs, and how can I see them? And I do my best, but it's never enough.
I definitely resonate with that. And I feel like, I guess, just to share a little bit, let me think, summer of 2023, my dad left the house, like, without telling anybody. And, like, that was, like, really hard on my mom. And I think because of that, like, my brother and I, we were both, like, not in New Jersey, which I'm from. My brother was in Florida, I was in Philly. And we kind of, like, it was kind of similar to you, where it kind of felt like while we were, like, kind of sort of doing things to, like, for ourselves in order to have a better life and be able to, like, kind of, like, take care of our parents in the future, it was always in the back of our mind. And it was kind of just like, oh, we have to, like, constantly check up on her, like, mentally, and, like, is she, like, because also she's unemployed, and it's just, like, the fact that, like, oh, we have to, like, kind of, like, financially, like, support her as well. Just, like, with those things, I think, like, definitely can take a toll on your own mental health. But I think, like, it's kind of, like, at the end of the day, it's, like, just constantly reminding yourself, like, oh, like, I will get through this, and, like, I know, like, at the, like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's just, like, you know, like, this might be hard right now, but then later on, like, looking back, you're like, oh, like, it was, like, probably, like, all worth it. And I think it's just, like, really important to kind of just, like, keep, like, reminding yourself that, like, you're kind of, like, almost there. But yeah, I'm
so sorry that you had to deal with that with your own family. That sounds tough.
It's getting better now.
That's good.
But that's good. I think I'm using humor to cope with it.
You and me both. I'm like, sometimes I don't realize how dark my humor gets with my family sometimes, because I'll just, like, my friends are like, how's it going? I'm like, oh, everything's fine. I'll make some, like, really dark joke about it. I'm like, what? I'm like, no, I promise it's just a joke. It's fine. Okay.
Because I feel like, I don't know if it's just, like, a vaguely thing, or just, like, you kind of, like, get very desensitized to a lot of issues, and you kind of feel like, oh, this is, like, normal, like, this is my life. And, like, you forget that, like, some people don't experience these things, but also it's, like, at the same time, I guess it's good and bad that, like, you're able to kind of realize that, like, other people don't experience this, so it's like, oh, you can have a life after this that isn't like this. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know if you ever feel like, I guess to a certain extent, not grateful, but like, oh, like, I'm kind of glad I went through this so that I'm, like, you know, a better person on the other side, sort of.
I 100% feel that way, and I totally resonate with what you're saying about, like, not realizing, I guess, how deep in shit you are sometimes.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, because I think then you talk to other people, and you're like, oh, this thing happened, and they're like, what? Well, that sounds awful. And I'm like, does it?
Yeah.
This is just a normal day for me.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to, like, kind of, like, see and be aware of that, because I think it helps us, you know, continue to have empathy. I think one challenge, like, sometimes when going through, like, a lot of difficult times with family and things like that, I think is around, like, how to continue to empathize with other people, you know, because I think a lot of folks, myself included, suffered empathy burnout a bit. You know, it's like, oh, I just can't feel things anymore. Like, I'm so tired of feeling, because it's always something very heavy, you know, and so just reminding myself that, like, hey, there's two sides to this coin, right? Like, on one hand, going through something super tough makes you a lot stronger, right? And you come out on the other end sort of able to handle any challenge you want, right? That's the positive framing of it. But we have to be careful also, in my opinion, to not let that desensitize us to sort of the things that other people go through in life. Everyone goes through something different, and we don't exist in, like, the Calamity Olympics, right? So, like, just because like your issues are far worse or you know, on some random arbitrary scale, doesn't mean that the feelings that other people are feeling about their lives are not real or valid. And so that's just something I try to remember all the time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I feel like TLDR, we all need like a zest for life and like kind of just like motivation to kind of just like have, I guess, like just have like something like personally that like you love, so that like you're able to kind of like go through these things. Like yeah. Well, thank you again, Alaric, for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking your time to share with us your experience. It was really insightful hearing about like your story and also like your motivations and passions to sort of like continuously create communities like wherever you go, and I feel like that's very inspirational. Is there any way that people can get in contact with you if they're interested in learning about the topics we discussed today?
Yeah, any contact method is fine for me. If people want to follow me on Instagram, or if people want to add me on LinkedIn, or just get my email, like all of those things are totally fine and they can reach out 100%. Yeah, I'm always happy to chat. I love meeting new people, so I'm always down to have a coffee chat and just learn about people's stories and connect, you know. That's all that matters, is belonging and connection to me. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, for those of you listening, if you enjoyed today's episode, feel free to follow us on Instagram at Figly Podcast and check out our website at figlypodcast.wordpress.com. For our other episodes, you can find us on Spotify at the Figly Podcast. And if you have any one or topics that you would be interested in listening to, message us on Instagram or email us at thefiglypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again.
Thanks, Emily.